A few weeks ago, the comic book Twitter sphere engaged in a conversation about piracy when Ted Brandt, inker for the award-winning image series Crowded, asked, "How do you get stuff taken off of a pirate site? Crowded's up to 95,000 reads on one I just looked at, while I'm completely broke." This led to many creators coming forward and talking about the problems with piracy, and it caused a lot of people to wake up and realize the dramatic impact that piracy has on this industry. I mean, just think about those numbers. 95,000 downloads on a series that just hit issue number 10? That's almost 10,000 extra copies of every single issue of Crowd. That would take that series from obscure little indie hit to big fish in the independent pond. And Ted Brandt isn't the first creator to come forward with actual numbers about pirating. Several months ago, before Jim Zub's criminally underrated Champions series was canceled due to low sales numbers, he took to Twitter and said that a few hours after issue number 4 was released, it already had thousands of downloads on a pirating site, numbers that easily would have changed the entire run of that series. Because of this conversation, a lot of people out there who had been silent about piracy because they always thought, yeah, it's a thing, but it's no big deal, finally had to realize not only is it a big deal, but a large chunk of comic book readers, a huge percentage of the comic book community is made up of pirates. This is not one of those, yeah, I don't pirate, but I think a friend of a friend of a friend of a guy I once knew pirated something. No, it's more of, yeah, I don't pirate, but he does, she does, he especially does. And because of this, the comic book community is finally having the conversation about pirating that should have had a long time ago. However, as this conversation was happening, as I was looking at the responses from both sides in this argument, I was shocked to discover both sides kind of have a point. Now, before I get into all that, let me just go ahead and make it clear where I stand on this issue. No, you don't pirate comics. Simple as that. Just don't do it. The only time when I think it's okay to pirate a comic is when that is the only format that book is available in. If you thrust your hand out and say, shut up and take my money, and the comic book industry turns back to you and goes, no, then yeah, what else are you supposed to do? I mean, let's say you want to read some of those old milestone DC comics because they were some of the most influential comics in the 90s and you want to know the history behind them. Too bad, DC won't print them. Want to read some of those Marvel and DC crossovers that you've heard about from people online? You want to see the two biggest companies actually colliding together? Too bad, the companies hate each other, so they're never going to print them. Well, then, yeah, what other choices do you have? But aside from that, for the 99.9% of all other comics that get pirated, no, I can't support it. I view it as wrong and something that overall hurts the industry. However, there were a lot of people online who are arguing for why they do pirate books and why they don't buy actual copies of these books. And while I don't agree with their end goals, some of them did bring up some issues that need to be discussed. Some of them did bring up some legitimate complaints with the comic book industry that do need to be addressed. However, a lot of them also brought up a bunch of, hey, what's the harm style arguments that, yeah, just don't pan out and we do need to break them down. In other words, there is a lot to get through in today's episode, but before we actually dive into that, let me just make one request of everyone watching this video. Watch the entire video before you form your opinion about what I'm saying, because I promise you, I'm going to be going back and forth on both sides of this argument a lot in today's episode. Let's start with the simple stuff. Why you shouldn't pirate comics. It's obvious. I don't even feel like I need to explain this, but if you don't actually support these books, they won't get made. However, there are many arguments that people make for pirating that they feel actually do justify their actions, and I feel like we need to break some of them down. The first excuse is the most obvious one: I don't have the money to buy books. I see this one come up a lot, and honestly, it's understandable. Wage stagnation is one of the greatest unspoken crises of the modern world, as wages since the 70s have not been increasing at the same rate as the price of goods across the board. According to the US Census, from 1999 to 2018, the real median household income increased from $42,000 to $63,000. That's an increase of roughly 50%. Now let's compare that to the increase in price of certain basic necessities. A loaf of bread in 1999 cost about $1.50. Now it costs about $2.50. That's an increase of 67%. That's a little higher than 50%, but not much, still manageable. Gas in 1999 cost about $1.17 a gallon. Today, it costs about $2.50 a gallon. That's an increase of over 100%. That's a little more significant. A house in 1999 cost $193,000. Today, the average cost is $377,000, an increase of 95%, still way higher than 50%, and also considering that we're now talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, the difference between 50 and 95% is kind of a big deal. I could keep going, but you all get what I'm saying. Stuff costs more now than we're making. And of course, the same goes for comics. As in 1999, a comic cost $2, and today they cost $4. Except when they cost $5. Or $8. Point is, the price of comics have gone up by double of what wages have increased in that time. And when the price of products increase across the board, people have to start making cuts from their budget, and the first thing to go will always be the non-necessities, because as the name implies, they're not necessary. They're not things that you need to survive. Which honestly is kind of sad, because you do need non-necessities in your life. You do need things in your life just because they bring you joy. They're kind of important to helping us to deal with all the other crap that we have to face on a daily basis. You know, like wages being stagnant for a couple decades. So I get it. Things cost more. We make less. We don't have money for all the comics that we want to read. But here's the thing. Comics aren't water. They're not shelter. This is not a loaf of bread, and you are not Jean Valjean. You can't just steal something because you don't have the money for it, because then it takes money away from the people who make it, preventing them from being able to make it. Or preventing them from having the money to buy the things that they need to survive. But the argument that people make in response to this is, well, why shouldn't I pirate this book when I wasn't going to be able to buy it in the first place? It's the difference between me reading the book and not giving the creators money, and me not reading the book and still not giving the creators money. And listen, I can understand this argument. On paper, it makes sense. You can't really steal something if it can be duplicated infinitely on the internet and no money was ever going to be exchanged in the first place, right? Well, here's the thing. This argument actually goes much deeper than most people think because of a little thing called unintended consequences. You see, no pirating site operates for free. They all rely on support. And you might think, well, I don't donate money to any of them, and I use ad blockers so they don't make anything off of me through ads, so I'm not giving them anything. Oh, but you are. You see, the pirating sites, like any website, need word of mouth. They need clicks. They need numbers to raise their awareness. The more people visit the site, the easier it is for other people to find them, which adds to their overall audience. And the bigger they get, the faster they grow, and the more influence they have over the industry. So with each click, with each download, you're helping them to expand. I mean, just think about the fact that I'd say about 80% of the people watching this video right now can probably name one of the big comic book pirating websites. We all know who they are, despite the fact that they are pirating websites. Websites that should be operating in the shadows. And yet, I'd be willing to bet that more people in the comic book community are aware of those pirating websites than are aware of actual comic book news sites. Every single time that I have to look up a specific panel from a comic so I can use it in one of our videos for a subject that I'm talking about, those sites always pop up. And they're always one of the first things to appear. Just think about that. That would be like if I had to search for a movie and the 4th or 5th result on Google was a shady offshore torrent site. If movies were being pirated to the extent that they were promoted that much, those sites would get shut down in a second. But for some reason, the comic book pirating websites just get a free ride on all this. My point is, even if you think to yourself, well, the comic book industry isn't losing anything off of me pirating these books, you're still using a website that pirates comics. You're still supporting them. You're still helping them to grow, which does have unintended consequences on the rest of the comic book industry. You're still damaging the comics themselves, even if you weren't going to pay for them in the first place. Now, there's another reason out there why even if you weren't going to buy the book in the first place, you still should not pirate the book, but I'll get into that a little bit later because it kind of ties into the other reasons why people give to pirate. The second reason being, well, I don't like this book. I didn't want to buy it, but I still need to know what was going to happen in it. Honestly, again, this is an understandable complaint. This is something that I will delve into a little bit later in this video, but yes, comic books are a giant shared universe. When you want to know about what is happening to a specific character, but you don't like the book, so you don't want to spend money on the book, I can understand that drive to go, okay, I need to know what's happening to him. I guess I'll just pirate it so that way I don't have to buy it. But again, there's other ways to learn what is happening to these characters rather than just pirating the book. If you don't like the book, if you don't enjoy reading it, just look up on a news site what happened to them. If it's a big deal, it'll be up there. Just look around YouTube. There's tons of other people who come in here and just give you their responses to what happened in a book. You can still learn what happened other ways besides pirating the book. Also, we know for a fact that is not one of the main reasons why people pirate. It's just one of the main reasons that people give. Again, going back to when Jim Zub quoted the number of people who were downloading copies of The Champions, there was a forum under those issues of The Champion, and a lot of those pirates were going in there talking about how much they enjoy the book. They were forming theories and speculations about where this series could be going. In other words, they were indeed enjoying the series. They just didn't buy the series. And now the series is gone. See how that works? It's almost like they're connected to each other. But moving into the third reason that people give for not buying books, that would be protest. Yes, I saw many people out there bring this up. I don't want to give my money to DC because I don't like what they're doing with their characters. I don't want to give my money to Marvel because I don't want to support Disney. I don't want to give my money to Marvel because I don't like their CEO, Ike Perlmutter. Let me just go ahead and say, voting with your dollar is a noble cause. If you do not agree with what a company is doing, then yes, you should not buy their products. But there's a few problems with this, especially when it comes to comics. You see, refusing to buy a product so you can protest it only works if the message gets across to the people at the top, meaning the protesters need to be unified behind their message. Right now, if you don't want to buy Marvel Comics because you're mad at Disney's business practices and it becoming a monopoly, is there really enough of an outcry in the comic book community right now to get that message to the top? To make that message clear? No, there isn't. If you decide to pirate, just picking a book here at random, Matthew Rosenberg's upcoming Hawkeye Freefall series because you're mad at Disney, it doesn't tell Marvel that you're mad at Disney. It tells Marvel that you don't want to read Hawkeye, a great character, or you don't want to read books by Matthew Rosenberg, a great writer. That's the problem with protesting a big business's smaller divisions. The protest rarely goes up the chain and typically hits the people further down who aren't part of the thing that you're protesting. And hey, I understand feeling disheartened by that. I understand feeling let down by this situation. I understand looking at what you're doing and saying to yourself, I want to vote with my dollar, only to realize, oh, if I vote with my dollar, I'm going to get a lot of people fired who aren't part of the thing I'm protesting. Just sucks. But that's kind of what this situation is. If you do want to protest, if you do want to vote with your dollar, there's better ways to do it than pirating comics. But there's another reason why no matter what your excuse is for pirating books, you still shouldn't do it. And it's a reason that a lot of people don't want to talk about, because it's a reason that comes down to personal fault, to something that a lot of people don't want to admit to, which is that pirating is addictive. Listen, let's just go ahead and say it. It feels good to want a thing and then to instantly get that thing for no money. That is a feeling that is hard to give up. It is hard to go back to paying for a thing that you just moments ago were getting for not paying for it. It's hard to stop doing that, and a lot of people can't. A lot of people out there start pirating because they can't afford the books. But then they keep doing it even when they can afford the books. A lot of people out there say, well, I'm just going to pirate this first issue just so I can see if I like it or not. And then if I like the book, then I'll continue buying the rest of the issues. And a lot of those people read those issues and then they say to themselves, well, it was good. Yes, it was good. But was it buy it good? I'll pirate the next issue and see if it gets any better. Then I'll start buying the issue. And all the people out there who pirate because they want to protest books, this entire conversation got started because an indie comic creator saw 100,000 copies of his book being downloaded that weren't being paid for. I understand wanting to stick it to the man. Who exactly is the man in that scenario? It's really easy when pirating comes as a result of sticking it to the man for the man to then morph into just anyone that you don't want to give money to. And that's what the real danger of pirating is. It's the fact that most people who start pirating can't stop themselves, even when their original reasoning for pirating is no longer there. Because when you get that feeling of instantly getting the thing that you want for no money, the justification that you had to start doing that can just keep getting twisted over and over again until it just morphs into whatever reason that you need to keep doing it. So yes, no matter what excuse you have to pirate books, it is hurting the industry and it needs to stop. However, yeah, remember at the beginning of this video when I said wait until the entire video is done because I'm going to go back and forth on this issue? Yeah, this is when that happens. Yes, I stand by what I said. If you pirate books, then you are hurting the industry. But a lot of the blame for why people pirate books can fall at the feet of the comic book industry itself. That's right, plot twist, time for the other side of the argument. Now, let me just go ahead and say, no, this is not about the price of books. Okay, it kind of is about the price of books, but not in the way that you're thinking. You see, one of the reasons I saw people have for pirating was that books were just too expensive. And yes, as I just pointed out, they are, because everything is. The price of products are increasing more than the price of our income. That is an understandable complaint. However, I think people don't quite understand how many people work on a book, how many people are employed by it, how much it actually costs to make a comic. And I know that a lot of people are going to say, oh, you mean to tell me that Batman doesn't sell enough copies to drop the price down? That Spider-Man can't drop its price? No, those books actually do sell very well and probably could drop in price. In fact, I'll do you one further. Both Marvel and DC could probably actually drop the price of all their books by an entire $1 and still be fine. But what about the indie books? Yeah, indie books already sell less compared to Marvel and DC because, well, they're Marvel and DC. They got the name brand recognition that brings an audience in no matter what. Indie books always have to struggle against that. Now imagine how hard they'd have to struggle to stay in the race if suddenly they cost $1 more than the big two. You see, even if they're the competition, the way that Marvel and DC do business has a huge impact on the sale of indie books. All comics are kind of tied together in a web where one plug is felt across the entire field. And that is about to become a theme of the rest of this video. The delicate balance of comics and how one change can cause it all to come down. For example, another complaint I hear people have with the price of comics and their reasoning behind why they pirate books is why is it that online books cost the same as physical books? Why is it that if a company doesn't have to pay for the actual physical products that go into a comic, or the actual printing cost, or for the costs that are put on top to help support the brick and mortar stores that actually sell you the physical books, why is it that I still have to pay the same price? It's a totally fair question, and honestly, it's one that actually has multiple answers to it. One being that physical comics come with ads in them and digital comics don't. So that is one source of income that the physical comics have that the digital comics don't, so you, the customer, do have to pay extra to help make up for that lack of income. Another reason is that, yes, brick and mortar stores do need those books to cost a certain amount so they can take a certain percentage off the top to keep themselves in business, but the digital stores also have to keep themselves in business. They also have employees that they need to pay. They also have servers that they need to keep running to keep all those books up. So you, the customer, do have to pay something for that as well. But honestly, the big reason why they don't cost less is because of Marvel and DC and Image started saying, hey, digital comics now cost only half of what the physical books cost. Do you know what that would do to comic book stores across the country? We would see brick and mortar comic shops either shutting down or just turning into toy and novelty stores in no time. They would not be able to compete with that. Even the people out there who say, no, there's just something about holding a physical book in your hands, there's just something about the feel and the smell of it, would have to second guess themselves hard the moment that they see, wait, it's how much cheaper online? Well, then why don't the indie companies do it, you might be asking? If they have to compete with Marvel and DC, and they know for a fact that if they sell their books at a higher price than the big two, then it practically spells doom for them, and it costs less to distribute stuff online than it does to distribute it physically, then why don't they take the plunge, and they start charging less for their books digitally? Well, because this is a far more complicated matter than most people think. Selling your digital books at a lower price than your physical books is kind of bad business for comics. Regular books can get away with this because they're a larger market. But indie books don't want to offend comic shop owners while they still need those brick and mortar sales. A lot of indie books out there rely heavily on good word of mouth being spread through the actual physical stores who they have spent years trying to establish good relationships with. So if they come in here and practically spit in their face by selling their stuff digitally at a cheaper cost on the same day it comes out, yeah, that kind of ruins that relationship that they've built up. Not to mention, whichever company decides to be the first to drop its digital prices is going to lose money for a while. Because this plan really only evens out if this brings in more sales. So you would need a massive campaign push to raise awareness for this. And in the beginning, it would probably split your digital sales and your physical sales, meaning you'd end up spending more per unit on your print books, while at the same time making less money off your digital books. Over time, if this gamble was successful and it did bring in a larger audience, then eventually you'd even out. But indie companies can't take that hit. They can't risk it. Only Marvel and DC have the marketing power and enough money in reserves to bring in an audience and hold on to that audience until all this evens out. And only then would it be safe for the smaller companies to follow. And at this point, I'm sure some of you are saying, are you getting a little off topic? It sounds less like you're talking about piracy and more like you're talking about the entire comic book industry as a whole. Oh, but it is impossible to talk about one without the other. Because yes, comic book companies could help to fight piracy if they decided to drop the price of their digital books. But if they did that, then it would end up hurting or even flat out destroying the physical comic book market. But that is a conversation we've been needing to have longer than the conversation about piracy. For you see, comic books aren't the first form of entertainment to find themselves in this situation. And every single time that I see creators out there say, well, we're not going to drop the price of our books because that wouldn't end up affecting piracy at all. Wouldn't it? Because it sure did for music, sure did for movies, sure did for pretty much every other form of entertainment. When I went off to college, every single person in my dorm had a Kazaa account, and they were downloading whatever music they wanted to illegally 24/7. Not a single person in that dorm stopped to think about whether it was right or wrong. It's just what you did back in the early 2000s. And there was a reason for that. Because back in those days, if you liked one song, just one specific song from an artist, you had to buy the entire album, which back in those days came out to 13 or 14 bucks just so you could listen to one song. That was madness, and nobody wanted to do it. Nobody should have done it. But back then, that was the only option. But then when iTunes came around and said, now you can buy just that one song that you want for 99 cents, we saw the number of music pirates plummet. Same went for the movie industry. Digital versions of movies cost much less than Blu-rays, and that's helped to fight movie piracy. But comics don't want to take that route because that means that they would have to break down the format by which we sell comics that we've been using for decades now. Here's the thing though. The format through which we sell comics that we've been using for decades now kind of sucks. Think about this. Just stop. Think about this for 1 second. Imagine comic books didn't exist, had never been a thing, and now you we're going to invent them in 2019. In the modern day and era, you're going to bring about the comic book revolution. And someone asked you, how are you going to sell this amazing new product? And you told them, well, we're going to have stores made specifically for them. And that's the only place you can buy them. And you have to buy the comic 3 months in advance, knowing nothing about it other than the creative team working on it and the title. That's all you gotta go on. Because if you don't buy it like that, then your numbers don't actually go towards supporting that book, meaning the people who are distributing the book have no idea how many people out there actually want to read this book. And if your local comic book store actually does buy copies of this book on their own, but they sell out before you get there, well then maybe they can order you another copy that would come in a couple weeks. But more than likely they wouldn't be able to, and you just wouldn't be able to read that book anymore. You would never get that terrible, terrible idea off the ground. That is an incredibly convoluted and restrictive form of distributing entertainment, and as we've seen in everything out there, from movies to music to streaming services, the more restrictive you become in how you distribute that entertainment, the more likely it is to get pirated. But wait, today we have digital books, and digital books are so much better. You can read them wherever you want. Get them whenever you want. And if you buy a copy of a digital book, it lets the creators know that one person bought one copy of that book. They don't have to play this weird guessing game. However, when it comes to the physical stores out there, they still use the same stupid system we've been using since the 90s. And if comic book companies want to get serious about combating piracy, they have to get serious about dropping the price of their digital books. But they can't do that because they would throw the stupid system that we've been using since the 90s for a loop. But we have to eventually do that. But no one wants to be the one that does it. The entire comic book industry is basically just in one giant Mexican standoff right now because nobody wants to be that guy that killed the comic book store. I mean, I gave you a couple examples of how the music industry dropped prices digitally in order to combat piracy. When was the last time you saw a music store? They still exist, but not like they did back in the 90s. Now, I know some people are going to say, oh, but they do decrease the price of their books online. Many companies, such as Image, decrease the price of their books by $1 or $2 after they've been in stores for a month. And even the big two companies sell their trades for way less than they cost in the stores. Yes, this is true. Image and other major minor companies such as Boom and Dark Horse and IDW will decrease the price of their books after a month. And even Marvel, after their books come out in trade, will cut the individual cost of their books in half, which is really good. In fact, being totally honest with you guys, I'm really impressed by how much cheaper Marvel trades are digitally. I can often buy a trade brand new on the day that it comes out for less than half of what the physical copy costs. When it comes to how many companies out there have approached discounting their older books, that's the right idea. But unfortunately, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter how much you discount the price of your older books. And that's because of another hole that the comic book industry has dug themselves into. Tell me, audience, does anyone out there know what FOMO is? FOMO stands for fear of missing out. And this is a well-known marketing technique used by entertainment companies to drive sales. Do you ever wonder why it is when tickets for a Marvel movie or a Star Wars film go on sale, you have to get your tickets immediately? You have to get them the second they go on sale, otherwise they're going to sell out? Well, part of the reason why is because Marvel and Star Wars just have huge audiences. But the other reason why is because Disney has spent years crafting audiences to know if I don't see this movie on opening weekend, then I'm going to miss out. If I don't see this on opening day, then I can't go on Twitter, I can't go on Facebook, I can't even go by the water cooler at work on Monday without someone spoiling it for me. We also see this in the video game industry all the time. Ever think to yourself, yeah, I enjoy this game, but I'm not going to spend money on DLC or loot boxes. That would be crazy. But then they put out there a custom skin for a character that you like, and they tell you it's only going to be available for a few weeks. Then it is gone forever. Now, you might be able to resist that temptation, but a lot of people can't. However, when it comes to the master of FOMO, to the undisputed champion of making people afraid of missing out, it's comic books. We have seen comics advertise themselves for decades with, "You can't miss this issue. Everything starts here. Everything changes. Someone is going to die in this issue." And hey man, I understand it. That gets people hyped. And you should get people hyped. That's what advertising is supposed to do. It's supposed to make you want to buy a book. But do you have to make people want to buy your book and the 12 tie-in issues as well? I've spoken out about this several times in the past, but comic book industries have a problem with events, with crossovers, and especially with tie-ins. And listen, almost every big major event is loaded with tie-ins that you don't need to read. But what if you actually did need to read them? Do you really want to take that risk? Aren't you afraid that if you don't read the tie-in, then you'll miss out? Comic book companies have been selling giant bloated events for years now, using FOMO to push people to not just buy the events themselves, but all the tie-ins as well. And hey, remember what I said a moment ago about how if Marvel or DC drop their prices, it could end up damaging the indie market? Well, there is something to that. That is true. But that doesn't mean they have to increase their prices as well, because these events and their tie-ins, they're not $4 each. No, they're $5, $6, sometimes even $8 or even $10 for a single issue. And that's got nothing to do with protecting the indie guys, and it's got nothing to do with saving the comic book stores. That's just plain old predatory greed right there, because they know that you readers can't bring yourselves to miss this giant massive event. It could actually change everything. You have to know what happens in it. You have to buy all these issues. So they've got you over a barrel right now, and they are more than willing to take advantage of it. One of the best examples of this came from the recent Absolute Carnage event. Now, this was a storyline spinning out Donny Cates' very popular Venom series, and it was largely going to affect that same Venom series. So it spun out of one book, was going to affect one book, so of course, we need to launch over 20 tie-in issues. And hey, I've been around long enough to know most big events have tie-ins that are totally unnecessary to the overall story. But Absolute Carnage was unreadable without the tie-ins. It made no sense unless you picked up at least a few of the crossovers. So when you turn to someone and say, "Hey, in order to keep following the one storyline you were reading, you need to buy these 20 extra books," you can't really blame them for saying, "I don't want to do that." And you also have to understand what it looks like when people turn to those people who don't want to buy these 20 extra books and say to them, "It's just tie-ins. What's the big deal? Just buy the books."
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
Don't you see how that actually kind of encourages pirating? And again, I want to make it very clear, I'm not on the side of the pirates. I don't think that pirating is okay. I am very much opposed to pirating. But if you go up to someone who you know loves fire, and every single day you keep dumping a big pile of oily rags and matches at their feet, when they inevitably end up burning down the apartment, you do have to answer some questions. And it's already hard enough to not become a victim of FOMO just because of the nature of shared comic universes. The entire premise of comics is that several books can all tie into each other. A character in one series is existing in the same world at the same time as another character in another book. So if you read one series, then suddenly that series crosses over with the X-Men, it doesn't matter whether or not you were reading X-Men, you now need to know what was happening in X-Men. Or sometimes a book will split into multiple books. Were you interested in seeing what might happen between Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson? Were they going to get back together again? Oh, you better keep reading Amazing Spider-Man if you want to know. Oh, wait. Mary Jane now has her own book. Does that mean I now have to start reading that one too if I want to know what's going to happen? And hey, I'm not complaining about this. I'm not saying this is a fault of the comic book industry. No, this is a strength of the comic book industry. I love the idea of a shared comic book universe. The idea that a character can be in this book and another character in this book, living their lives at the same time, and then they end up crossing over with each other. That is a beautiful, unique thing about the comic book industry that makes it special and has made it a wonderful form of entertainment for decades now. but we do have to admit it does kind of play directly into the hands of FOMO all on its own, so we don't need 20 tie-in issues piled on top of that. And again, I'm not saying that this excuses piracy. It doesn't. Nothing excuses piracy. These are comics, not food and water. If you don't want to pay for the comics, don't read the comics. It's as simple as that. But when the pirates complain about this, they do have a legitimate complaint. This is something that we actually need to discuss. The big two companies out there are embracing a sales technique that they know encourages piracy, and then they wonder why everyone's pirating their books. It would kind of be like if you walk home at night down one specific alleyway, openly counting how much money you have in your wallet every single night, and then you get mugged. Then you do it again the next night, and you get mugged. Then you do it again the next night, and you get mugged. Yes, the muggers are the bad guys here. They should be caught, they should be punished. But dude, seriously, after the second time this happens to you, why are you still doing it? But here's the thing about all this. End of the day, I don't think Marvel or DC really cares if you're pirating their books. Don't get me wrong, the creators care. The people who actually work on these books, they care a lot about whether or not you're pirating the books, because that decides whether or not they're going to keep having a career. That decides whether or not they're going to be able to eat in the next month. So yes, they care. But the people at the very top, the people who make all these decisions, I don't think they actually care. Because I think the people who pirate these books aren't the target audience for these books. Allow me to throw out there another term. How many people know what a whale is? No, I'm not referring to the big massive sea mammal. Whales is a term used in the video game community to describe people who buy a game, then load up on microtransactions and DLC. In other words, it's someone who buys a sandwich, then gets a Scooby-Doo size amount of fillings added into the middle. Have you ever looked at a game and thought to yourself, who would buy all these cheap little add-ons and all this pointless in-game currency? Well, someone does, and it's the main target audience for a lot of games. This is another reason why I said voting with your dollar today is kind of a hard thing to do. You could say, I'm not going to buy this game because I'm going to protest it, and I got 10 of my friends to protest it as well. Good for you! That one whale over there just bought the game and $1,000 in microtransactions. So, you guys kind of didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And in the comic book industry, whales have been a thing for a long time. We just didn't have a word for them. But effectively, it's the exact same thing. You can say that you're sick and tired of crossovers. You can say you're sick and tired of 10 giant, massive tie-in books that you have to buy to understand this storyline. You can say that you're protesting this entire practice. That's nice. Doesn't mean anything if a whale comes along and is willing to buy every single tie-in that gets put out and multiple copies of them, and yes, that is a thing. I worked in a comic book store for 5 years, and in that time, I saw people in their teens and 20s come in every single day. The largest demographic for comic book pirates coming in, scrounging together whatever money they had so that they could buy 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 issues. They wanted to buy more, but they just couldn't afford it. But then some guy would come in, an older customer, wearing a suit fresh from his high-paying job, and he would proceed to buy 10 copies of every single book that Marvel put out. No, I am not kidding. So yes, that younger audience, they can complain about all the times they're being put out, but as long as that guy keeps coming in there and buying 10 copies of every single tie-in issue, Marvel's gonna keep pumping them out. Is going to keep putting them out because they also know that even if that younger audience out there could afford to buy all these tie-in issues, they're smart enough to know that's not how it works. They're smart enough to know I shouldn't have to read all these books. I don't want to read all these books. But the whale does. The whale wants to keep coming back. I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. Okay, yes, those customers do exist, but they're rare. They're so uncommon, it's not even worth factoring them into this equation. And you're right. The customers out there that buy multiple copies of every single book that comes out, they are rare. They're so rare, I'd be willing to bet every single comic store out there doesn't even have a customer like that. However, the smaller whales, the ones who they don't buy 10 copies of every single book that comes out, but they certainly buy every single tie-in to every single event that comes out, they're not that rare. They're actually a far more common thing. So what you have is an audience that keeps buying all these tie-ins and keeps supporting all these events. And then you have an industry that keeps pumping stuff out aimed directly at that audience. But then over here you have another audience that doesn't want to support these giant events. They don't want to read 20 different tie-in books. But they have that fear. They have that fear that something might happen and they'll miss out. But what these companies aren't thinking about is the fact that this audience is dying. That audience in the comic book world is largely comprised of older readers. Younger readers don't have the money to keep up with these sales tactics. But they do have the method and the access to pirate these books. And because, as I've said, pirating is easy and addictive, it spreads beyond tie-ins. It spreads all the way down to the little indie creators like the people over at Crowded who spurred this entire discussion on in the first place. Adding fuel to the pirating fire is hurting these smaller books, even the smaller books at their own company, and it's building an audience that will gladly turn to pirating over purchasing in the future because that's what they're trained to do. So what we have here is an industry with a flawed distribution method that you can't fix without screwing over the stores. We have a flawed sales method that you can't change without losing those whale sales. And without fixing this, it's encouraging more pirates. Pirates whose influence is damaging the wider landscape of comics as a whole, and it's so hard to convince people to stop being pirates that the longer we go without addressing these issues, the more readers you will permanently lose to this lifestyle because nobody wants to go back to paying when they know they can get it for free with no immediate repercussions to themselves. So what is the answer to pirating? Honestly, the answer is we just have to tear the entire thing down. The comic book industry does not want to change, but eventually it's going to have to. We've had the same flawed system of selling books since the 90s, and if you remember, that's kind of when the comic book industry collapsed because of how bad this system was. And yet, we kept using it. Every single other branch of the entertainment industry has evolved, and while comics try new stuff such as discounts through Comixology, it's way too little. When I talk about needing to change, I'm not talking about stuff like if you sign up for Comixology Unlimited, you get 15% off of one issue. No, I'm talking about stuff like Marvel or DC, one of the big two, just flat out saying, hey, we're no longer selling physical single issues. From now on, all of our single issues are digital, but they're $2 a pop. I'm talking about comic companies saying, yes, we have a big event with multiple tie-ins, but if you buy all the main issues of the event, then you get all the tie-ins for just $10. I'm talking about stuff like Marvel saying, yes, we're launching 6 brand new X-Men books. And if you subscribe to them digitally, you can get all 6 each month for the price of 3. Or how about if you sign for Marvel Unlimited, you don't get access to a bunch of random old issues for free. You also get to pick out 5 books every single month to read totally for free as part of Marvel Unlimited. And I know people are going to say this sounds crazy, but this isn't anything different from the way we've seen other media evolve to combat piracy. Hell, manga was one of the most pirated things on the planet. Manga piracy made comic piracy look microscopic by comparison. So you know what the people over at Shonen Jump did? They made the new issue of their book totally free every single week to read online. And it smacked manga piracy rates down significantly. Now, don't get me wrong, Shonen Jump has a far larger audience than American comics, so they could afford to do this and American comics can't. But come on, man, we have to do something. We can't even get DC to drop the price of their digital books a year after they've been out. Or we've still got comic book companies putting out their needless hardback versions of their trades so they can cost more than the single issues did. This isn't helping. Everything that we've tried so far has been too little, and I'm afraid if we don't get serious about this now, it's going to be too late. It's time that we start getting serious about how to combat comic piracy, and just having creators go on Twitter and say, don't do it, is going to work about as well as the DARE campaign worked to prevent teen drug abuse. Yes, I know it sucks seeing a book get pirated. It is wrong. I do not support it. But me just saying that is about all I can do, and that's not really going to do anything. We need the people at Marvel and DC and Image, not the creators. The creators have enough to worry about. I'm talking about the people at the top. We need to see those people coming together and figuring out a way to combat piracy. And as we have seen throughout the entertainment landscape over the past 2 decades, the answer is not make it harder to pirate, it's make it easier to buy. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of ediTHORGIals, everyone. I'm sorry that we were kind of all over the place on this one, but hey man, we had a lot of ground to cover on this one. If you like this episode, then make sure that you give us a thumb up, click that subscribe, and share this video around the web. It is the best way to help this channel grow. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time.